Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Cocktail Podcast. Today we're talking about the James Bond spirit itself, gin. What an interesting episode this is going to be. There's a lot of cool knowledge and history behind this spirit, so hang in there. I'll touch on a bit of the background before going into on any information of what is available in the gin world, so that when you're out and you're asked the dreaded question of what gin would you like, you can reply with confidence. So before we even get into what gin is, we have to firstly look at a spirit called Genever. Now, Geneva is like it's Belgium slash Netherlands clear spirit. Now, do not say one or the other, because they both believe that it is solely theirs and not the other ones. So the spirit is malted and infused with juniper and sometimes botanicals such as like orange and lemon peel. Essentially, if you made a whiskey and gin to have a child, they would produce Geneva. So during the 18-year war in the 18th century, rebels in like what would be known as now modern day Netherlands fought alongside the British against the Spain to try and gain Dutch independence. The rebels had a weird beverage that the English used to call Dutch courage. And the reason they called it Dutch courage was because they used to drink it before they went into battles. And I used to have a Dutch bar manager, and he always used to tell this story. And I said, yeah, but surely it's Dutch courage, you drink it before you go into the battle. And he goes, no, actually what would happen is they would drink it the night before. And I said, yeah, but why is that then Dutch courage? And he said, well, you get so drunk on it the day before that when you go into battle you're really hungover, so you don't care, and you just go in and you just fight and you're just angry. So that is apparently where the phrasing Dutch courage comes from, and it's not the stage of having a drink to have confidence to go do something, it's getting really hungover the day before you do something you don't want to do. Um, so the British saw the Dutch drinking it, this weird like malt wine made with juniper, and they brought it back to England. So over time, the malt wine with juniper distillate was replaced by a malt spirit as distillation started to become more commonplace. And then they would infuse it with juniper and other botanicals, and that kind of led to the foundation of gin in the 17th century, where they decided not to use malt, but they decided to use neutral grain spirit instead. So this led to the foundation of gin in the 17th century in England, and it slowly rose in popularity in comparison to one of the most popular alcoholic drinks at the time, which was French brandy. This was mainly due to the fact that the government would allow unlicensed gin production, whilst also imposing higher import tax on foreign products. So essentially, brandy was really expensive and gin was really cheap. So a lot of people go, well, why am I drinking brandy when I can just drink gin and it's so much cheaper? So that's what led to the increase in popularity. That popularity was known as the gin craze, where essentially so much gin was being produced that it was just a staple alcohol. And people were just getting drunk off it all the time. So much so that out of the 15,000 drinking establishments in London, about half of them were gin shops. The government imposed a gin act to try and regulate all this unlicensed gin production, and that resulted in riots. People really did not like that. So they came up with a second one, which was actually more successful, and it lessened the unofficial production of gin and began to like kind of make it more into a licensed product, something that quality could be maintained and all that type of stuff. In the 19th and 20th century, distillation through the column still um, made different styles of gin easier to produce. And this is mainly when we started to get different styles as opposed to just general style gin. So, for example, the London dry gin style emerged about this period. And in tropical colonies, when we were in India or when we were in Africa, gin was used to mask the bitter taste of quinine. So, quinine was known as like the only effective anti-malarial compound back in the day, and it is extremely bitter. So what they would do is they would dissolve the quinine in carbonated water to make a tonic. They would make a tonic water. And then they would mix it with the gin because the gin had like juniper and had some strong flavors. They could kind of mask that bitterness, and that's what's led to the modern day gin and tonic. However, before you go out there, before you go on holiday, and you go, oh, instead of dealing with mosquitoes, I'm just gonna drink loads and loads of gin and tonics and I'll be fine. Modern day tonic waters have barely as much quinine in it as normal. So that bitterness is more of an artificial bitterness than you get, as opposed to any actual real quinine. I actually knew a guy who, when we were 18, brought a six-pack of tonic water to a festival because he was like, well, it's cheaper than buying mosquito spray and they don't like it, so I just drink a can of tonic water a day. And he didn't get bitten, but then also it was off the coast of Cornwall, so I mean, there wasn't particularly many mosquitoes there anyway. So, in order to give you like a simple description of what gin is a neutral grain spirit, which is just no flavoring, it's just a spirit distilled from grains. That's flavored with botanicals, which are just herbs, roots, fruits, that type of stuff, in which the predominant flavor needs to be juniper. And that's what gin is. Now, before I go breaking down the different styles of gin, I just wanted to say that because Genever is juniper dominated, please do not think of it as Dutch gin. Try and pour it with some tonic and expect it to be like a Bombay Sapphire or a Gordon's and tonic. Essentially, imagine if you were trying to use it as like a blended whiskey in that sense, and how disgusting that would taste. I've never actually tried blended whiskey and tonic, although I do kind of want to try it now. If you are going to try Genever, I'd recommend having it neat, either chilled or room temperature. And they usually serve it with a beer chaser. So if you are going to try it, that's probably the best way to do it. So now heading on to the major categories of gin. You have London Dry Gin, which, contrary to popular belief, this does not actually have to be made in London. It doesn't even have to be made in the UK for that fact. It's a name given to gins with the strictest manufacturing specifications. This means the alcohol they put in it, that neutral grain spirit, is of agricultural origin. It's not just artificially manufactured, with no artificial flavours added. And botanicals typically used in a London Dry Gin are coriander, cardamom, orris root, angelica root, nutmeg, orange peel, cinnamon, and obviously juniper. Some common examples of London Dry Gins are Gordon's, Tanqueray, Bombay Sapphire. Secondly, you've got Old Tom Gin. So Old Tom Gin is a sweeter style of gin. So they add sugar to it. But back in the day, this was mainly due to the lack of control that was given over the gin production. So what they would do is they would add sugar to cheapen the product and to hide the more herby, more bitter nose that would come from the poor quality of distillation. Now, the name is a bit strange, Old Tom. The name originated from the fact that old pubs and taverns would put statues of black cats, often called Old Tom cats, outside their establishments once the Gin Act of 1736 came in, the one that kind of gave more strict regulations and then you could just make it out of your bathtub if you wanted. So if you had a black cat outside of your pub or of your tavern, it meant that you could buy gin illegally. So what people would do is they would put money in the cat's mouth, that would then go down to the bartender, and gin would be poured through the cat's paws in order for people to drink it on the street, and without anybody noticing. I also personally believe that the reason they added sugar to these gins that were mainly consumed this way was because those pipes won't necessarily be the most clean. And so if you put a load of sugar in it, it's going to taste a lot better. People are going to want to come back for it more. So having sugar and alcohol in the same thing makes more sense from that kind of point of view. So Old Tom Gins recently kind of come back in. There's still not many distilleries that do produce Old Tom Gins. But it's definitely way more popular than it was like 20 to 40 years ago. Some brands that you can that produced Old Tom gin are Langley's, Bathtub, and Boatyard Old Tom gin. Now I wanted to touch on quickly because there's often bathtub gin chucked around as well as a category, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily a category, but the reason bathtub gin has become a thing it was because in Prohibition people used to make gin in their bathtubs in America in the 1920s. So that's where bathtub gin came from, and speakeasies used to do it that way as well. So if you're ever curious, that's where it's come from. Now this is an interesting one. It's Plymouth gin. In contrast to London Dry gin, that's able to be produced anywhere in the world, Plymouth gin can only be produced in the coastal town of Plymouth on the south coast of Devon in the United Kingdom. Now, it was produced by the Blackfriars Distillery that was founded in 1793, and it's actually the oldest working, or one of the oldest working distilleries in England. The gin has more earthy flavours, and it focuses more on those root botanicals, which is where that earthy flavour comes from. And it's the favourite of the Royal Navy, as Plymouth used to, and I think still does to this day, have quite a big like naval influence. And this gin used to be carried on the naval ships, and always and used to be part of the rations in order to boost morale and in order to combat seasickness. And Plymouth gin, there's one Blackfriars distillery. There used to be more than one that could produce Plymouth gin down in Plymouth. However, it's become more of a regulatory thing now that only that company in that town can produce Plymouth gin. So if you wanted to try something different, and you've tried London Dry gin, give Plymouth gin a try. Their sloe gin is also really nice. I'm a big fan of Plymouth gin. Now, heading on a little bit more, just going to go to Japanese gin. So it's a very new type of gin that emerges over the last decade, kind of similar to Japanese whiskies, only just starting to take off more. Japanese gin focuses more on the local botanicals they have over there and making sure they're top end quality. And they tend to keep their gin a lot simpler and just let those botanicals speak for themselves. And so they tend to contain less botanicals than what you would find over in Europe. However, they are more true to the botanicals' original flavour profile. Like, for example, you can have Kanobi gin, Roku gin, and Yukio Blossom gin. Now, what I find interesting with gin, and I heard this from a distiller, I can't remember exactly which one it was, so I apologise, whoever's quote I'm nabbing. They described how within whiskey, it's almost like you're sculpting, and you're slowly chipping bits away, and you're finding the nice bit of stone in the middle, and you're going from what is essentially a block to a nice, refined sculpture with loads of details and nuances. Whereas gin is more like painting. You start off with a blank canvas, that being the neutral grain spirit, and you flavour it with botanicals. Now, there's different methods for how you do it, and I didn't decide to put them in here because there's not really that interesting. But essentially, there's various different types of methods that they can use in order to add in botanicals, and they've all got their pros and their cons, but it's almost trying to get a nice combination, making sure you can put the right strengths in of different botanicals, trying to make sure you get the right combination of colours on the painting. I think it was a really nice description. I am completely butchering their description of it. However, there's so much going on in the gin world at the moment. This was mainly because of, I think it was Sipsmith who ended up doing it. It used to just be big distilleries that could produce gin. Your Gordon's, your Bombay Sapphire, your Tanqueray, your Plymouth. And then Sipsmith was one of the new distilleries to open up in London. I can't remember, it was within the last 10, 15 years. But they applied to try and run, I think it was a 300 litre still, which sounds huge. However, I think that's a really small still in comparison. It might be 30 litre, but I have a feeling it was 300. And they got it through. And they were like, okay, weird. Not usually how it works. So people saw that Sipsmith did it, so therefore they started applying for it. And loads of gin distilleries popped up out of nowhere because they were able to go for lower and lower volume of stills, which would mean that firstly there's less of a startup cost, so therefore the barrier to entry for the business wasn't as high, and that's why we started to get more of a gin boom of loads of different stuff coming out, loads of unique flavors, loads of different styles, loads of flavored gins as well. So that's also one of my pet peeves. When people go, oh yeah, well, gin was really in fashion, so therefore something must be next. And usually I hear that it's rum. And whilst I want them to be correct, because of course having booms and alcohol, it's really good for the business, and it kind of just brings you loads of new products, and you're able to have that competition in a healthy way, and there's loads of more stuff being presented in supermarkets to the consumers, loads of people able to start up businesses. It's not necessarily the case. The only reason there was a shift in the gin world was because people are able to have less of a barrier for entry, but that barrier for entry is still the same in other places. I mean, the gin distillers might decide to swap to another alcohol, but in my mind, I don't think there's going to be a boom in another alcohol for a while. Although I do think that bourbon is becoming more popular in the UK. Starting to see it more in pubs, starting to see it more in the supermarkets. For example, I went into Tesco the other day and there was a good 4 or 5 bourbons in there, and I was like, what the hell is going on? Usually you wouldn't find you'd only find Jim Beam and Jack Daniels back in the day. So yeah, there is some movement, but don't think necessarily just because there's a boom in one alcohol that another one is going to take over from where it left off. Anyway, I've stopped my waffling. That is a beginner guide to gin. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you know a little bit more now about what gin is, what the difference is in between it, and when you look at a gin on the shelf, or when you're asked what gin do you like, you can go, oh yeah, well I really like citrusy gins. I really like this specific botanical. Can you make me a recommendation? Or yeah, I'd like to try an Old Tom gin. Do you guys have any? No, we don't. However, I can make you a recommendation for this one. Ask your servers, ask your bartenders when you're out in a bar. It doesn't have to be just, oh yeah, I know that brand, I'm going to go for that one. If you want to try something different, make sure you ask. These guys are taught on their spirits, they're educated on it by their bartenders, so do ask for recommendations. And if you're not certain what you like, go, okay, what's new in? Talk to me about it. What's a new spirit you've tried recently, and what have you learned recently? Because these bartenders, they stand at the same bar every day. If they get a new alcohol in, they will learn about it. It's something new. It's something interesting. They'll taste it. They'll learn about it, and they'll kind of learn the whole process of how that stuff is made. So there's a lot of information on this type of thing. If you want new recommendations in gins, new recommendations in alcohol in general, make sure you talk to your bartenders. They are the most educated people in those places. So, yeah, anyway, you guys have a lovely day. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.